the most important thing is that if we as consumers don't support these types of cheese, they will disappear. So it's really up to us to act.
Hello, everybody. It is Dani Valent here with you for Dirty Linen, my food podcast. I love chatting to people from all different areas of the world of food, hospitality, produce. Today, we are talking about one of my absolute favourite eating experiences. In fact, the last thing that I ate last night was cheese, and I believe there will be cheese on the schedule for today as well. It is a good day when there is cheese involved. When you think cheese and Australia, the name Will Studd is never far away. He is the cheesemonger, cheese activist, cheese educator, cheese communicator, passionate cheese lover that has taught so many people here and elsewhere about the ins, outs, joys, perils, problems, and importance of cheese. He has a new show coming out. He's been working on it for a while. I've only seen a little snippet of it, but it looks absolutely beautiful, super important. It's called Cheese, Searching for a Taste of Place. Will Studd, welcome to Dirty Linen.
Hi there, thanks for having me.
So good to have you on the show. Will, what is artisan cheese?
Oh, well, that's a very good question. A very good leading question. In my book, it's cheese that's made by hand on a small scale, and with a single source of milk. But sometimes that milk can be various sources. But you need to have some link to place. But I'd split up artisan cheese into farmhouse cheese, which would be cheese made on the farm with milk from the farm, and then artisan cheese, which would be made on a small scale, not necessarily on the farm, with milk from a limited number of farms. And
I mean, I love cheese. Why should I care whether my cheese is artisan or not?
Well, you should. The question about artisan is more complicated than that, because the word artisan and the word farmhouse has been captured by the big industrial producers. So you often find the word artisan and farmhouse used as a brand name rather than to a particular type of cheese. So the first step in cheese making is to discover its provenance and perhaps not depend on the name artisan or farmhouse, but try and find out where it comes from. I know that sounds complicated, but it's super important, because if you look out there in the market, you can see farmhouse milk and it will be produced by a big industrial cooperative dairy. And you'll see artisan cheese, same story. What does it really mean? And trademarked here and trademarked there. So I talk about artisan cheese, you talk about artisan cheese, but it can be misleading. You know, it's pretty sad, but that's just the way it is. There is no official definition. When you go out looking, the first thing to do is find a good cheesemonger or someone who understands cheese, and listen to what they've got to say, and see whether and the tasting is the proof. Really, that's the way to go.
And why do we care whether cheese is, whatever word you want to use? Why do we care whether it's small batch, whether it's single origin? Like, why are we focused on this?
Well, we're focused on it because the implications of not having it are huge. Small scale artisan, farmhouse, whatever you want to call it, cheese making is all about cheese with a taste to place. It's about cheese that reflects a genuine taste to place. And that comes down to the type and animals, type and breed of animals that are involved, the climate and the geography of where the milk is collected from, the skill of the cheesemaker, and a whole host of other diverse influences. You know, traditional cheesemaking is really, really complex, and every cheese that is made reflects a different time, a different a different place. And effectively, a real cheese, what I call a real cheese, reflects a time and place, and that they will be different every day, every season, and that is something to celebrate. But in the modern world, you know, we walk into a supermarket, we expect strawberries all year round, we expect tomatoes all year round, and there's a temptation with cheese to be the same thing, and artisan cheese isn't that. It's about celebrating the seasons and that diversity. And if we don't have that, then cheesemaking will become very industrial. And what does that mean? That means probably one or two breeds of cows. It means very, very large farms. It means just when it comes to animal welfare, it has huge implications. Like as the size of a herd gets bigger, animal welfare goes backwards. Effectively, you sort of end up like battery cows or battery animals, and cheese becomes very consistent and very dependable, but not very interesting.
Yeah, I mean, it's just that old story about connection, isn't it? It's about, you know, being connected to people through food, to be connected to specificity and the seasons. Cheese is a way that we can tell stories to one another.
Yeah, and that's going back to the new series. That's really what, you know, cheese searching for a taste of place. If you think about cheese generally, you know, if we talk about camembert, we think about France. If you talk about Parmigiano Reggiano, we think about Italy, or Gorgonzola, we think about Italy. If we think about cheddar, funnily enough, we probably think about UK and England. And so cheese essentially, at least traditional cheese, starts with a taste of place. And in our modern world, there's a huge threat that will disappear. And we'll just end up with commodity cheese. And really, my career has really been all about trying to celebrate the differences and the diversity of traditional cheese making. And I'm very concerned that the way the world's going, that's going to disappear. And if the consumers, we don't support it, it will disappear for sure.
Well, Will, tell us, you know, about some of the people that you met, the stories you encountered, that taste of place that you've visited these farms. You're telling us these stories in the show.
Well, the show covers 6 hours of cheese and cheese searching for taste of place. The first episode basically looks at America. Now, I should perhaps start with explaining why I made this series. This is a legacy series. Cheese Slices has been going for 25 years. And funny enough, it's the world's longest running cheese show. It's probably the only one, but it's the world's longest running cheese show. And this new series started during COVID. And I decided to make it because I felt we hadn't sort of put a full stop on the whole story. And I wanted to make it before I was too old to make it. So the first episode is about America, and really it talks about 3 cheesemakers I've known for a long time who focused on making raw milk cheese with a taste of place, and how successful they've been in a country that essentially is famous for its industrial cheese production. And why is that relevant? It's relevant because in Australia, we haven't managed to achieve the same thing. I'm pretty proud to be an Australian, and this whole thing about cheese, my whole commitment to making these shows has been about trying to convince Australians that we should have a fair go when it comes to our choice of cheese, and cheese should have its rightful place on the table. So starting with America seemed logical, because if the Americans can do it, why can't we? So that's the first episode. And the second episode looks at camembert. There's been camembert is one of those amazing cheeses that screams France, as we talked about before. But in fact, there's more cheese made under the name camembert in Germany than there is in France these days. And out of the 60,000 tonnes they produced in France, only 6,000 is produced, 6,000 tonnes is produced the old-fashioned traditional way from raw milk. The rest of it's super industrial, generic camembert. So that sounds terrible until you look behind the scenes and discover that in the last decade, there's been remarkable revival in farmhouse camembert. And so the episode on camembert really explores the myth of camembert. We all think camembert's been around forever, but it's only been around for probably 150, 200 years. And in its current form, most of the camembert we eat is nothing like the original cheese. So it's quite a modern cheese. It's got an extraordinary story, and what's great is to see this renaissance in traditional farmhouse cheese making. So it's a story of hope. It's if the French can start making farmhouse camembert and recognise it as such, then again there's hope for Australia. It's not over yet.
Well, maybe we'll pause and talk a bit more about Australia, Will, because, people who followed your career and your campaigning will know that you've been agitating for the changes to regulations in Australia that allow the production and sale of raw milk cheese. If people have been following this story for, like 20, almost 23 years or something, they may recall that you famously gave a funeral to some Roquefort, carried it to the tip in a hearse. It was a stunt that I suppose really drew attention to the archaic laws that are supposed to be there to protect us, but actually keep us from cheese that has been feeding and not poisoning people for centuries. What's the state of play in Australia now?
Well, the state of play in Australia is fairly critical at the moment. In Australia, the Roquefort story started a process which took another 10 years before Food Standards Australia, which controls Food Standards Australia New Zealand, which controls the food laws in Australia, decided that they would allow the production and sale of hard cooked varieties of cheese made in Australia. So that's cheeses similar to, say, Gruyere or Parmesan, which had been allowed to be imported for decades. That's how come Nick Haddo at Bruny Island got to make C2. So between the Roquefort case and 2015, there was this big debate within Australia about how they were going to change the regulations, and finally they came up with a set of regulations that allowed the production and sale of hard cooked cheeses and a complicated set of equations about what else could be made. It's important to understand that the way Australian food regulations work is, first of all, you have Food Standards Australia New Zealand, which we share the same food regulations with New Zealand on everything except cheese. That's the first point. The second point is that the Food Standards Australia and New Zealand, they set the rules, but actually the policing of those rules is down to the states. And then we have a third level of government regulation which controls imports and tries to ensure that the imports comply with Australian standards. Now, obviously, the imported rules sort of struggle to tell the French how to make cheese. So there's a fairly arbitrary decision-making process about what fits and doesn't fit. And the big thing behind all of this that I've learnt, well, so it's pretty obvious really, but Australia has really fought against European cheese ever since the Uruguay round of trade in the 1990s, where there was an agreement to free trade, and this is really topical now with what's happening with America, where there was an agreement to free trade, but the Europeans announced that they were going to register names, PDI names, names of particular cheeses, and nobody else would be able to use them. And the response from Australia, New Zealand, and America was to take the matter to the World Trade Organization and say, no, you can't do that. You can't register the name Gorgonzola. You can't register the name Camembert. We're not going to let you do this. And at the same time, they applied a system of equivalence, which was written into the Uruguay round, and said, well, if we don't allow the production and sale of raw milk cheese in Australia, then you won't be allowed to send your cheeses into the country. So there was this whole business about banning raw milk cheese really hasn't got a whole heap to do with food safety. It's a lot to do with trade regulations and trade barriers and objections to the Europeans trying to get their geographical indicators registered and prevent Australia from using names like Pecorino Romano or buffalo mozzarella made with cow's milk, etc. Anyway, that goes back to the 1990s, and they're probably the best example of how bizarre that is that when Australia came up with these new regulations in 2015, allowing the production and sale of cooked cheeses, at the same time, the British finally announced that they were getting out of the EU and that their recognition of geographical indicators therefore no longer applied. And an application that I made in 2002 was finally followed through, and the Department of Agriculture, DAF, decided that they would allow the importation of 12 British raw milk cheeses because Britain no longer recognised the geographical indicators, and in exchange for a free trade agreement. So we do a free trade agreement with Britain, and part of the deal is we suddenly recognise 12 raw milk cheeses that we wouldn't be allowed to make here. Now that, I'm sorry, the DAF will tell you it's just a coincidence. Fazans will say it's just a coincidence, but that didn't happen until Britain left the EU and changed its stance on geographical indicators. And it's not fair on Australian cheesemakers to have imports of cheese that we wouldn't be allowed to make here. The whole Roquefort case was yeah, sure, it was about the right to a choice of Roquefort, but it was much more complicated than that. It was about the right of Australian cheesemakers to make a similar cheese to Roquefort. If we tried to make a blue cheese from raw milk in Australia, there is no way we would be allowed to do it.
Yeah, so it is very complex. These battles extend over decades. The fact that they're all bound up in these free trade agreements is a subtlety that I wasn't aware of. I guess I do want to just, for people who aren't embedded in this conversation, like just the whole idea of raw milk, let's just explain, like it's about raw milk means milk that hasn't been pasteurized. Pasteurization means that the milk is heated to a certain point that kills pathogens, but at the same time, it also removes a lot of the complexity and the flavors that do give cheese its sense of place. Is that a fair explanation, Will, for the general punter?
Yeah, that's really good. And I think a good way to explain how important it is to one of the episodes that in Cheese Searching for a Place looks at milk and microbes and the implications on cheese, and looks at the whole raw milk thing. But just to give you some idea how important it is in terms of specialist cheese, France has more specialist cheese shops than it has McDonald's.
Go France.
Okay, and 80% of the cheese sold in those cheese shops, at least 80%, is made from raw milk. So in order to have a culture of small specialist cheese shops in Australia that support the industry, those shops need to have a point of difference. There's no point in selling industrial cheese in a small shop. The supermarkets are very good at doing that. So it's bigger than just the animal, the welfare. It's also about a whole cultural change. And in Australia, we can't develop that culture without having access to those types of cheese.
I think, there's so many directions we could take this conversation, Will. And, one of them is the whole mess of the Australian dairy industry. Farmers are selling, they're depressed, they are underpaid. There is no incentive for them to produce quality milk. But I don't want to talk about that. What I want to do is for you to take me into the romance and the joy of an artisan farmer in You Choose the Country. I want to be swept up in the romance of it, and I want to connect with the cheese that way.
You're so right, actually. That's really where the joy is. For me, the joy of the whole specialist cheese industry is when you taste the cheese, it brings puts a real smile on your day, and you go, "Wow, that's really great." And sharing that with people is really great too. And the joy of getting behind the camera and explaining these cheeses is sharing that with people. It's not all about this grind against authority, etc. It's much bigger than that. And cheese searching for a taste place is very much that. It's about explaining why cheese should have a rightful place on the table. And when you go to visit these cheesemakers, they are so passionate and so extraordinary, and they're so committed to what they do. You can't help but feel for them. And in Australia, for example, Nick Haddo, who Nick and I have worked for donkey's years together, he's so on the nail when it comes to his cheese making practices. He's got his own farm. He's got his rare breeds. He knows what he's doing. He ticks every single box, and that's really, really fantastic to see. And when I go overseas and meet people that I've known for a long time, it's the same thing. Their passion and commitment to what they do is extraordinary. For example, Delphine Carl would be one. I mean, she struggles in an industry that's dominated by big industrial producers. She produces less than 1% of the Roquefort in France, and what's amazing is she's the only artisan Roquefort producer. She's whatever that means, but she's basically a maître fromagère when it comes to producing Roquefort. But more importantly, her milk, for example, she only collects milk at lunchtime. Why? Because it's still warm and hasn't gone through the whole refrigeration process, which kills milk. And then she makes cheese only in the afternoon, and it's all made by hand. That's as opposed to machine. Her molds are unique to the family and go back 3 generations. And then when you actually get to the cheese and these wonderful caves and then start looking at the shelves, etc., you realise, well, first of all, the shelves sort of talk to you. They're made of oak, and they go back 400 years, some of them. You start talking to her, and she'll tell you, "Well, we only cut the wood to replace the shelves in the winter when there's got no sap, and then we leave it for a year before we cut it and turn it into shelves." And then you find out she's the last producer to still mature the Roquefort actually on the shelves. Everyone else is using plastic. And that sort of to smell and walk into those caves and see cheese being matured the way it has for centuries is really, really special. So we actually go out and visit one of her farmers, and the sheep, again, it's extraordinary the way the sheep are kept. And for example, I always thought that the best time of year for Roquefort would be when the sheep get out into the fields and start munching on the grass, which doesn't happen until about May. And Delphine's adamant that actually they're better off being kept inside rather than outside, because as soon as they get outside, you get a very wild variation in flavours. And it's the end of lactation, and it's not always the best time of year for cheese making. And I think that's also very important in the whole cheese making story. There is no right answer. Sure, I've got an opinion, which quite but it's not necessarily right. Everyone's got an opinion, and it's important to listen to what everyone else has got to say.
Oh, and what does her Roquefort taste like, Will?
Well, it's super rich, and it's First of all, when you taste Roquefort, when you taste any good cheese, the secret is when you put it into your mouth. The first thing is to just roll it around on your tongue and see what happens. And the flavors should slowly sort of work across your tongue down to the sides of your mouth, and then. Slowly but surely, if you count to 10, you can then swallow it, and you'll find that there's this secondary flavour that sort of comes up the back of your nose. So that's and it just stays with you. And at some point in the next minute or two, you want more.
Might not take 2 minutes. So
it's a umami plus. I mean, how the hell do you describe umami? I don't know, but it's a great cheese. It's when you put it in your mouth, go, isn't this great?
I'm so there. That you've done such a great job of explaining. I mean, it's romance, but it's connection, it's importance, it's legacy, it's all that knowledge. What's the impact of a quality cheesemaker shutting down?
Well, it's huge, and I can tell you that. During filming this, as I said, I started this in COVID, and in order to make the show, one of the first people we went to see was Holy Goat. And unfortunately, I've got 15 minutes of beautiful footage on Holy Goat, and they speak so wonderfully about their animals and their animal welfare. They tick every box there. It's so special, but because they're no longer in production, and we didn't have time to have the time in the show to put them in. We're sort of limited how much we can put in. Unfortunately, I'm going to have to put that footage out separately. But Holy Goat's no longer with us, and there's 4 producers currently in Australia making raw milk cheese. And I don't know how to say this romantically, but very soon there'll only be 2.
Wow.
So that's sad.
What do we lose?
Well, we lose so much when we lose animal welfare. We lose diversity of breeds. We lose we lose any incentive to farm and produce good quality milk. One of the biggest challenges in a country like Australia, which has been built on producing cheap milk, but not necessarily good quality, is that there's no incentive to produce good quality milk if it just sort of rocks off down the road and gets put into a big vat along with everyone else's milk and pasteurised and churned out as industrial cheese to be sent off to the rest of the world. Why would you bother? And what that means in terms of animal welfare is that the herd numbers have to get bigger and bigger and bigger. So when you see rotary dairies, etc., that's the only way that family farms can survive. Since I came to Australia in 1981, 75% of small family dairies have closed.
Yeah, it's a whole other series, I reckon.
No, I don't. Well, I think you're right. I don't think it's so negative. It's not worth talking about. And I think you're right. We should concentrate on celebrating the positives. And that's really what I mean. Yes, it's not all negative, but the most important thing is that consumers, if we as consumers don't support these types of cheese, they will disappear. So it's really up to us to act on it, because if we don't, then and I think that's what I've been very lucky in the cheese industry. I've been doing it a long time, and what I'm trying to do here is contribute something back towards the people that I think really matter in the industry. That's really what it's about.
Yeah, well, I'd say to anyone who enjoys wine and knowing the story of that, or who loves walking down to their local sourdough bakery and buying a loaf of delicious, unique, individual bread, then, anyone who likes seeing farmers name checked on menus, I think we can all connect to the importance of these small farmers who are carrying knowledge often of generations and representing the seasons and particular breeds of animals and, all of that terroir into their products. And I mean, I think if I'm helping by eating great cheese, then I'm definitely on the campaign. Will, where can we see the show?
The show's on SBS Food, and it'll go around a few times over the next couple of years. So SBS Food and on demand's the best way to watch it, I think. So that way you can just actually, in fact, what I'd love people to do is go out and find some cheese, and because it's on demand, you just get the cheese, get your wine, and sit down and watch the show, and you can,
It sounds like a great, it's a great way to be an activist. Cheese, searching for a taste of place. Will Stodd's new series. Check it out on SBS Food. Get some cheese to enjoy with it. Will, thank you so much for chatting to us today on Dirty Linen.
Well, thanks for your support. It's so important. Thank you.
It's important stuff. Thank you. This is Dirty Linen, and I'm Dani Valent. We air the issues that the hospitality industry finds hard to talk about, hearing from different people with unique perspectives. We want to hear from you as well. If you have something that needs to be said about a topic, get in touch so we can include your perspective. Contact us at dirtylinen@deepintheweeds.com.au or hit us up on Insta at Dirty Linen Podcast. We can't wait to hear from you.
This is a Deep in the Weeds production.